So she was about to leave when he told her, please let me, just fix your hand. He's like, and I can do it, and I can explain, to you how you're like the first person in over 4 years that I've spoken to in person. So even though he owns like this massive company, he does everything virtual. Like, he doesn't need to have anyone physically around him. So that's pretty much how he's lived his life for the past 4 years. So then he takes her to the bathroom, fixes up her hand, and then he offers her to stay for dinner. So she accepts, and she says, that's the least you can do since you had me come over here for nothing. So they sit down and they eat, and he notices her drink, needs to be refilled, and he refills it. And then before you know it, she's at drink number 3, and her limit's 2, so she's a lightweight. So, but that liquid courage is what brings her to tell him, well, you owe me a job. And he's like, okay. And so she thinks it's a joke. And when she's leaving, he's like, okay, I'll see you Monday, 10 o'clock. And he's like, because I'm not like, an early morning riser. And she's like, you're serious? And he's like, yeah, you still need a job, right? And she's like, yeah. He's like, well, again, be here 10 o'clock Monday morning. He's like, I got plenty for you to do. So she heads home. She's on cloud 9, but she doesn't call Julie to tell her in case like this is all a dream. So because she has to like get it out, say something, tell someone, so she writes it all down in her journal. And by the time she's done, she's written about 10 pages. And then she gets a call from the detective to tell her that the guy that made bail, that the guy who was the driver of that vehicle, because they still haven't told us his name. We know there's clearly previous history, but they have not given us his name yet and the connection. And so she lets her know the guy made bail. He's going to be out 7 o'clock in the morning. And she immediately freaks out and she calls Julie. And Julie's like, pack a few bags and you can just come and stay with me for a couple of weeks. Because her dude, Logan, was going to be out of town. And she's like, just, you come stay here. And so at first, Harley's like, I don't want to be a burden, that type of crap. And Julie's like, listen, either you pack your bags or I'm going to come over there and I'm going to pack them for you. Either way, you're coming. So when Harley gets to Julie's place, Julie tells her, you need to tell the detective everything and get a restraining order against him. They need to know this isn't just some random guy. So the next day, she does go to see Detective Richards, and then we get, the story. So the guy that attacked her is a guy named Parker Huntington. And Harley used to write a sex blog about a couple of years ago. And so the premise of it was that she was an escort and she would blog about her exploits. Well, it got like super popular and she started getting emails from this Parker guy. So at first it was kind of innocent, but then he started showing up everywhere she went. And so he apparently had paid a private investigator to find out who she really was. And then he started stalking her even more. So the detective asked, like, if these exploits were true or not. And she was like, no. And she, of course, immediately felt judged. Like, okay, so if I write about sex, then, I'm supposed to be attacked. I'm supposed to be stalked. So she felt some type of way, of course, with that questioning. And the detective was like, I'm not judging you. I'm just asking. I just want to have all the facts. And so she tells the detective, no, none of this was true because I'm still a virgin. So she's 26. She's still a virgin. So the detective, takes out the blog to read it. And she kind of looks at her again like, really? And she's like, yeah, it's just my imagination. And so the detective tells her, because she was about to storm out, she was about to freak out. And she's like, listen, again, I'm not judging you. I just want to make sure I got all the details so that I can get you this restraining order because you clearly need one. So she's granted the restraining order. Her and Julie go to Trader Joe's. And when they get back home, she tells her about the job. And, of course, Julie's like, is he as hot as they say? And so Harley doesn't say anything, but her face turns bright red. So Julie knows, like, yeah, he's hot. So Julie was like, he probably likes you. And since he went through all that trouble just to apologize, So she's like, what are you going to be doing? And of course, Harley's like, I don't know. And I'm like, girl, you could have said what the initial email stated for a researcher. You could have just said that. Because when you go, oh, I don't know, then of course Julie's mind is like, oh, it's going to be some sex stuff, Then Harley starts freaking out like, oh my gosh, what if he asked me to do stuff? You know what I mean? But it's like, you could have avoided that. You could have just said researcher, because you don't, at least that was what he initially said. If it changes, it could be more. You could have said a researcher and probably doing some other stuff. I probably would have left that off. I would have just said a researcher and let it be. I don't know. That's what I think she should have said. So when Harley arrived at the mansion on that Monday, she's like super nervous, and he takes her, shows her where she'll be working. He goes over the different proposals that he wants her to see which one would be good for Minetta. That's the name of his company, and I think I said it right, Minetta. That sounds right. She will also be doing odd things as well, like picking up packages, going to get food, things like that. So he tells her, she can go pretty much anywhere, but she cannot go to the Upper West Wing. He's like, if you go there, you will be immediately terminated. So she reads through the different proposals, and when it's lunchtime, she goes to the kitchen, eats her salad that she brought, and then she goes upstairs, but she doesn't go to the Upper West Wing. I thought for sure, I'm like, she gonna test it and go, but she didn't. So she finds a mirror, she takes a selfie, and she kind of like, dang, like this kind of the best I've ever looked. This is like the best mirror. But I think it's because she never really looked at herself like she was this really, good looking woman. And I think maybe there's a little confidence boost there now. And it's kind of like, now she kind of sees herself. I don't know. I'm like, it's not the mirror, girl. Like, come on. So Jackson comes up from behind, and she thinks he's going to be upset that she's taking a photo, but he's not mad. So he asks her to give, a presentation on, so far, like what she's kind of been looking at with the different proposals. And so she, of course, is looking in her phone, and she doesn't look up. So he starts to laugh, and then she gets pissed. And she's like, why would you laugh, And she gave him a nice rant. And so he tells her, you can speak without looking down at your phone. And he tells her to try the presentation without the phone. And the girl has a full-on panic attack. And she was trying to get away. So he grabs her, and he, like, places her on the couch. And he has her, like, put her head between her legs and tell her, like, take deep breaths. And so eventually it starts to subside. And so, of course, after this, he says, listen, from now on, just email me. Because this is just too much. And so they keep talking once she gets herself together a little bit better. And her mind she's easing out of the anxiety a little bit. And so she's able to tell him what she thinks of the different podcasts. And that's what he wanted her to do from the get-go. Just talk. If you just talk about them like it's regular conversation and don't think of it as a presentation, that's what puts that burden on it. It's like, just talk, And she had some great ideas, and he's like, I'll look these over, And she's like, okay, well, I got a few more that got to go through. And he's like, all right. So when it's time for her to go, she goes to find him to say goodbye. And he asked her, she heard him on the phone, and he sounded like he was mad at someone, but she couldn't tell like exactly what was being said. And so right when she's finna leave, she's like, oh, I just came to say goodbye. I didn't know what the protocol was, So right when she's leaving, he's like, do you have plans for tomorrow night? And she's like, no. And he's like, well, would you, be my +1 to this black tie fundraiser? And she says quicker than she had even anticipated on saying. And he tells her, you can work from home tomorrow. He's like, and then I'll have a stylist come over to your place and they can give you options for everything, which was pretty great because she was flipping them out about like, how am I going to afford a dress, for this type of an event? Because, this is just day one. She hasn't gotten that, $50 an hour. That's what the job was offering too. I don't know if I said that earlier, but it was $50 an hour. So it was a good paying job. So the next day, Jackson gets ready for the event, and then we find out that he actually needs to go and meet this investor because he doesn't want to have to lay off some of his employees. So his business is not doing as well. He's still wealthy, but it's not doing as well as he would like. So in order to avoid that, he does need an investor to kind of come in and give him a, flux of cash. So, he goes to pick up Harley via car service, of course, and he goes up to her apartment to pick her up. And she, of course, dropped dead gorgeous in a red floor-length gown, and he's just stunned. And, of course, she's, stunned with him because he looks great in his tux. And so they get in the car, and he explains to her, that he hasn't been out of the house in 4 years, and that the reason it took him so long to answer the door is because he hasn't been around anyone in that amount of time as well. And so she apologizes, and he grabs her chin and he tilts it towards his face, and he's like, you don't need to apologize. I'm thankful you crashed into my life. And so he tells her about the fact that he needs for the night to go well with the investors, and he kind of tells her a little bit, I need this for my company. I don't want to have to lay off any, employees, and if I gotta put aside my issues for it, I'll do it. And she admired that about him. And so when they go in, she goes to get them a drink, and they go in a corner, and then he suddenly can't take it anymore and he kisses her, and she, of course, she's very receptive, and he pulls back, and then she pulls for him again. And his claustrophobia just kind of set in. And he was like, I can't do this. And he ran off. So, of course, he feels bad, and after meeting, like once he left from her, of course, he's like meeting multiple people. And, or shall we say, kind of reintroducing himself back into high society. And so he keeps scanning the room for Harley. And he's about to give up on finding her because he's like, oh shit, she really left. And then he sees her with his CFO, who is Avery Phillips. She's a woman. And he comes over, and once he calls her Phillips, he just calls her by her last name. So